Hi, ocean lovers. Welcome to Season 2, Episode number 5 of Dive Stories, brought to you by PADI, helping millions around the world to seek adventure and save the ocean. I'm your host, Ocean Allison, and on today's episode, I'm chatting with PADI ambassador and adaptive diving advocate, Cody Unser. During this episode, Cody shares all about her personal adaptive diving journey, about the power of introducing people living with paralysis to the world of scuba, and her fundamental thoughts on the importance of seeking adventure. All that and more coming right up. Thanks for being here. Ready to jumpstart your next underwater adventure? Good news! We're offering Dive Stories podcast listeners an exclusive 20% off all PADI recreational e-learning courses. With PADI e-learning, you can start your next dive adventure right now from the comfort of your own home before connecting at any time with a PADI dive center or resort to complete your in-water training. Head to PADI.com/courses to select which dive course is right for you and use code PODCAST, that's PODCAST, to take advantage of this exclusive 20% off discount. You're listening to Dive Stories. We bring the underwater world to you through in-depth conversations with inspiring divers from around the globe. Thanks for diving in with us as we seek adventure and save the ocean. Happy listening and happy diving. Today's Dive Stories guest is PADI ambassador and adaptive diving advocate, Cody Unser. Cody, welcome to Dive Stories and thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
I am so excited to be here.
Awesome. We love to hear that. But we're actually going to start this podcast out by diving right into what we call the Dive 5. And how the Dive 5 works is at the start of each episode, I ask our guest 5 rapid fire questions about their experience as a diver and an ocean lover. So what do you think, Cody? Are you ready to answer the Dive 5?
I'm ready.
Okay, perfect. Number 1, where is the first place you ever took a breath underwater?
It was in a pool here in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Okay, number 2, who is a diving hero that inspires you?
Definitely Sylvia Earle.
Amazing, me too. Okay, number 3, what is your favorite ocean animal?
Jellyfish.
Ooh, nice one. I don't think we've had that answer before. Okay, number 4, where is your dream dive destination that you hope to dive someday?
God, I have a list, but Fiji.
Okay, last one, number 5, in just one word, how does scuba diving make you feel?
Like I'm possible.
Thank you so much for answering the Dive 5, Cody. We're going to get a little more in depth now and jump into the core of this interview. And to start, I think it'd be good if you could share a bit about your personal experience being diagnosed with transverse myelitis, becoming paralyzed at 12 years old, and how that felt for you at first prior to getting involved in scuba diving or anything like that.
Yeah, so for those of you that don't know me or are familiar with my story, so I was born and raised here in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I come from an auto racing family, so my childhood really consisted of, being on a jet ski or a four-wheeler or go-kart. We traveled to different racetracks. It was just always on the go. We were very active as kids. So yeah, on February 5th, 1999, that completely changed for me forever. I woke up like it was any other day, got dressed, went to school, and then I had basketball practice after school. And during practice, I suddenly had a hard time catching my breath, like I couldn't breathe. So my coach said, "Okay, Cody, just sit down, rest." And then from there, everything got worse. And I just remember shaking and not being able to breathe, and my head was hurting, and but my left leg went completely numb. Like I couldn't feel the bottom of my heel on the floor, and my right leg was tingling. And this happened in the span of like 20, 30 minutes. So very scared, had no idea what was going on. Went to the hospital where my symptoms were completely misunderstood. My parents were going through a divorce at the time, so the doctors thought I was either dehydrated or I was making it up because I wanted attention. So they sent me home. I couldn't walk, I couldn't urinate. And I woke up the next day thinking that everything's going to be fine because doctors don't send you home if you're not. But I woke up the next day, my belly was extended because I drank lots of fluids as they instructed, thinking I was dehydrated, and I couldn't urinate. So my primary care physician came to the house and she was like, all right, Cody, let's put you in the bathtub. Let's see if just hearing the water will make you go to the bathroom. Let me just see if there's any sort of connection. And so she set me in the water, and that was the first time I actually broke down crying about what was happening, because I couldn't feel the texture or the temperature of the water.
Mm.
So it was a very traumatic, like, oh, something's really wrong here.
Yeah.
So went back to the hospital, spent, a few months in the hospital. But in a couple days, after doing a bunch of tests, they came back with my fate of transverse myelitis and didn't know what that was, what it meant. I just wanted to get out of the hospital and I wanted my legs to move again. And so then I went to rehab. So learning how to move my paralyzed body on the bed, on a mat, how to transfer in and out of my wheelchair, just learning how this all is going to work. And I just remember those days being really dark, really frustrating, really angry. You feel really small once you lose something like that, once you lose your mobility. I remember thinking, okay, I only have a half working body now. So that really means that I can only live a half life. I just felt, all right, there's a whole list of things I cannot do now. Once I came home, I was like, you know what, this happened to me for a reason. I have a well-known last name. I can do something about this. And it really just started off with a conversation with my mom, like, I got to do something. And so we started the Cody Unser First Step Foundation. And it really only has, at that moment in time, it really only had two sort of primary missions, which was about awareness about transverse myelitis, because it is a rare autoimmune disorder. It does get misdiagnosed quite often. So how can we get doctors and researchers to share data and talk? And it just kind of grew from there. I mean, my mom was really a brilliant, she just knew branding and marketing and advertising from being married with my dad in racing. She kind of gathered all that kind of that skill set. And so we just started networking with other organizations that were definitely more into the paralyzed world than we were at the time. And suddenly my eyes just opened to this whole world of, oh my God, there's so many people with disabilities and spinal cord injury, and I'm not alone. And so it's been quite the journey. I mean, it's been, one of growing up with that sort of excitement of what your body is capable of doing, and then having your body's limitations become your new identity. It's been kind of a personal identity journey for me, but it's been awesome at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like when you were young, you said those first couple of years were really challenging. And then, starting the foundation with your mom, it seems like your perspective not only broadened, but also got a bit more positive, right? Like, you could do something, right? And, like I mentioned, when I asked you about how you felt, but prior to getting involved in scuba diving, right?
Mm-hmm.
It seems as though once you were introduced to the world of scuba diving, your outlook on life became even more positive, right?
Extremely.
And just totally expanded. So I'm curious, how did the idea of learning to scuba dive come about in the first place? And what was that initial underwater experience like for you? Because I imagine it was just like another world.
Yeah, no, exactly. So how I got into scuba diving. So before I became paralyzed, my mom, my dad, and my older brother Al, they all got certified. And so I knew that once I turned 12, that I was going to do it as well. And my sister too. Like we all were, kind of excited about diving once we turned 12. So I always knew I wanted to do it. But then when I became paralyzed, I totally wrote it off as something that I'm not able to do. I'm paralyzed. I can't wear fins. I can't move my legs. There's no way I can dive. So when I came home from rehab, my brother Al kind of told my mom, "Look, we got to do something. She's really depressed. She's really sad. Um, she's got to try scuba diving. Let's just try it, Mom." And so when I first tried it, I mean, it's a challenging sport for anybody with the gear, the wetsuit. I mean, there's a lot to the sport that a lot of people don't realize. But I think that's what's so captivating by it. And especially for those with disabilities, like for me, first time doing it, it was the first time that a situation or an experience took me out of my paralyzed mind. And I was like, oh man, there's something to this. I'm able to do this. But at first, just putting on the gear, the wetsuit, I was like, why does anybody do this? This is so hard. And breathing underwater, like initially doing it, you feel like you have to hold your breath. It's kind of uncomfortable. You are a little scared, a little nervous. But it was the first time that something challenging, because up until that point, everything had to do with the wheelchair. Everything that was challenging had to do with my paralyzed body. So here was this activity I'm now doing that's really challenging, but it has nothing to do with paralysis. So going through the class and learning with my instructor, it was, oh my gosh, this is the best thing on the planet. And then I did my certification dives in the Bahamas, because for people with disabilities, especially paralysis, like cold water is really not good. My legs spasm and my whole body kind of gets tight and tense. So it's not a fun experience. I know that there's, dry suits and stuff like that, but that's even more of a training and requires a little bit more to it. But tropical warm water is really good for people with disabilities. So I did my certification dives in the Bahamas, and it was on the way back to the dock on the boat. And I remember kind of just tearing up and crying with my mom because I was like, oh my God, I feel so free. Nothing is impossible anymore. I do want to go to college. I do want to learn how to drive. Like I just opened my world up to other possibilities. And it was the catalyst that catapulted me into wanting to try new things, wanting to, it just let me know that I'm okay. I can rock being paralyzed. I've got this. What was I so worried about? Or what was I doubting, myself about? Like, this is easy. I can do this. So I was like, Mom, we gotta start a quality life program, part of the foundation, to really encourage other people with disabilities to learn how to dive. Yeah. Because from there, once you dive, you feel like you can do anything. So we got to do this. We got to start something.
Yeah, no, I mean, that is absolutely incredible how empowered it sounds like you felt after those dives in the Bahamas. So thank you for sharing about your experience with that. It's really, really amazing and amazingly well said too. And, like you mentioned, you and your mom had already founded, your nonprofit, the Cody Unser First Step Foundation, with the initiative of, just raising awareness of transverse myelitis. But now with this scuba diving perspective, you were like, okay, we're going to expand this. And so I do want to highlight a few of the primary initiatives that the foundation focuses on, that are around scuba diving. And one of those is connecting people, other people living with different forms of paralysis with adaptive scuba diving, like you mentioned. So I'd love if you could share with myself and listeners some of those main ways that you have been able to make scuba diving a reality for both children and adults over the years.
So what we've been doing for the last 22 years is Um, I mean, it's really been about community outreach because I think a lot of rural areas don't have access to a lot of, activities and things to do for people with disabilities. So, what I'm really proud of that we've been able to accomplish is kind of just driving to local, rural towns. And we kind of, we work with local either leaders or organizations within that community to then kind of, all right, how can we reach out to other people with disabilities here in this community and provide them with scuba diving? So we've traveled in in my mom's car. We've flown to different places. We did a camp in Indiana that I'm also really proud of, where my whole dive team, we traveled there. We brought all the gear. We hooked up with a local PADI dive store when we were in Indiana to provide us the tanks, the weights. And for 2 days, we worked with kids with different disabilities, so spina bifida, cerebral palsy, and they had no idea what they were about to experience. But we got to the camp where they had just this small pool, and we put in about 100 kids within the 2 days. And I mean, just the smiles on their faces, they they feel like astronauts putting the gear on. Like they get like so excited dry side. And, once they actually get in the water, my team's working with them. A lot of the kids would actually, submerge underwater. Then they would start smiling because they are so excited about it. And then they start choking because they're just so excited. So then the instructors, my dive team would bring them back up and explain, you have to put your mouth around the regulator, but the kids were just so excited. So what we did with that program was there were a few kids there that wanted to continue diving. So we were able to take them to either the Long Beach Aquarium or the Denver Aquarium. And we did kind of like a weekend retreat where we walked around, rolled around, went to restaurants, but then we actually went diving in the aquarium. And those kids, then eventually we took them to Key Largo and actually got them certified. So what we do is like from community outreach at pools to aquariums to the ocean, like it's really all about letting people know what's possible and what they can do instead of what they cannot do. Because I'm reminded every day of what I can't do. And diving is possibility.
Wow. Well, the Cody Unser First Step Foundation certainly lives up to its motto of changing lives one dive at a time in so many ways. And, I'm curious for you, what does it mean to you to get to actually observe, in person, these people's lives positively changing through the work that you do, taking them, whether it's in a pool in Indiana or in the ocean in the Florida Keys, like what does that feel like for you when you see these people's lives changing?
Oh man, it always brings me back to that. It brings me back to feeling very small, very vulnerable. And then to now feeling like I can rock this, I really just want to provide that same feeling to other people, because when you're in that dark place, it's really hard to get out of it. And you think that nothing will help. I just remember when I became paralyzed, it was, my mom, especially my family, there's this rush of anticipation and nervousness. And, the family wants to make you okay, make you happy, but it's your journey. I tell newly injured people who become paralyzed, like it is your journey. Like everybody on the outside world will pressure you to be okay and be happy, but it is your journey. So, and I think that's what's so cool about diving is that it's so unique for everybody. Mm-hmm. Everybody's experiences are completely different, and sensations and what they can do and where they go, so every time I see another person, that's come out of the water after we did, a dive, it just brings me back to that same feeling of what, is possible.
Yeah, so another incredible area of focus for the foundation is actually to collaborate with medical researchers to better understand how scuba diving helps people with disabilities. So, can you talk about how this facet of your foundation came about and what are some of the main findings that have come about from this collaboration?
Yeah. So after I learned, I got my certification, started diving more. I started to notice that I was having sensations at depth in my legs and in my bladder. So I would come back up to the surface and I just felt things more. Like it was just, for some reason, when I would go touch my leg, I actually felt it more. So I then took this, like it just wasn't one, sort of experience. It kept happening every time I went diving. And the deeper I dove and the longer I stayed down, I saw all these effects. So I talked to my doctors at Johns Hopkins, my neurologist and my neuropsychiatrist, and I was like, there's something going on with scuba diving that I
Wow.
think we need to look into. And they're like, yeah, sure, Cody, and but then I was like, I was persistent with it, and I was like, no, we got to do a study. And they came back with, well, it's really hard to get an IRB approval with something like this. Like, we study drugs and therapies within four walls, Cody. We don't go to the ocean. And I'm like, no, you're going to this time. So it was a lot of work, a lot of writing, a lot of lobbying for it. And then we sort of partnered with the Paralyzed Veterans of America, the PVA, and we took 10 veterans, all with different stories, backgrounds, level of paralysis. And we went down to the Cayman Islands and we were there for about, I don't know, maybe 5, 7 days. And we basically did this pilot study, the first of its kind, on the neurological and psychological benefits or effects of scuba diving on the paralyzed body. So it was where science meets, science and medicine meets the ocean. And we all know that the ocean has healing properties. I mean, it's we can't live without it. But there is something to diving that really does have beneficial effects. And so I also did make my doctors learn how to dive. They got certified.
That's awesome.
Because I was like, I'm not going to just, you guys are going to just stand on the boat with a clipboard and do, your little observations. No, I really want you to experience what we're experiencing underwater. So it was just really, it was a lot of fun, a lot of work. And so after we left the Cayman Islands, my doctors, Adam and Daniel, brought me down to Johns Hopkins and they presented the data to me. And I was shocked. I mean, I knew what I was feeling. I knew there was something to it. So they saw it was an 80 to 100% reduction in PTSD symptoms. And then the participants also reported greater sensation, like I did, and some movement back. So one of the vets reported that he was actually able to sort of hobble on the airplane. Like his legs were definitely more responsive. So, I mean, little things like that can create tremendous amount of therapy options, like in the future. So, since then, there's been like, I mean, I've had groups email me about their studies. It's really just encouraging, just more thinking outside the box of what therapy means for people with disabilities.
Okay, ocean lovers, it's time for the dive log, the part of the show where we feature an epic dive story from one of our amazing listeners. This episode's listener dive story comes from PADI diver Ricky about an unforgettable dive he had in Ecuador. Let's dive in.
Hello, Paddy. My name is Ricky, and I am from Ecuador. I can share my favorite dive story, which is the first one. I've been a diver for only 3 months now, but the first time I went for a recreational dive, I was pretty much a beginner, and I was very scared. But 5 minutes into the dive, a giant man ray came to us and just passed by, but I was so shocked to see it. Eventually, I would make a connection with that same manta because I would recognize the patterns on the belly. But this time, this manta would come to us and play with us and be near us. It was so mind blowing. I just love my first dive because I got out of the dive being a completely different person, more aware and more conscious about the sea. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ricky, for sharing that special underwater experience with us. I would say that a surprise visit from a manta ray during your first dive ever definitely makes for an unforgettable dive. Listeners, if you have an epic dive story to share too, head to PADI.com/podcast to record and submit one of your most memorable dive stories for a chance to be featured in an upcoming episode. We love hearing from our global community of PADI divers, so head to PADI.com/podcast today. And now, back to this episode. So, Cody, to shift gears here a little bit, whether someone is simply a fellow diver on a dive boat, or maybe they're a PADI instructor or a dive shop owner, how can people in our global community support your efforts to increase accessibility and inclusiveness for adaptive divers?
Great question. Well, first, yeah, if you're a PADI instructor, and if anything that I've said has any sort of meaning for you, I would highly encourage you to do the adaptive techniques course that we sort of help develop with PADI. And we live in a concrete jungle where accessibility is a really big issue still in 2021. The Americans with Disabilities Act did a lot for people with disabilities in terms of access and, laws against discrimination. But when my mom and I were kind of figuring out, all right, so how do we then bring adaptive scuba diving to people with disabilities? How do we do this? Because what we did run into and what I experienced is a lot of instructors don't know how to work with somebody with a disability because we're not all the same. Our challenges are different. An amputee is different from somebody with a spinal cord injury, who's different from somebody with cerebral palsy, spina bifida, autism. The whole spectrum of disability is it's vast. And so the challenging thing is really just kind of training instructors and getting instructors that want to, because not a lot of instructors feel intimidated by working with somebody, which is natural. But it is possible, right? Diving is possible for people with disabilities. You just have to maybe work with them longer, depending on their mobility issues, and work with different adaptive equipment. Like, I don't wear fins, so I wear webbed gloves. Like, it really does come down to working with the specific person's mobility needs. So for the last 22 years, I'm still on this train of trying to educate and motivate instructors who want to learn to how to teach somebody with a disability. And that's what I love about being with PADI, is that they really embrace this whole idea of wellness and accessibility, it's an inclusion. My whole dream is to picture a world where if you want to learn how to dive and you want to find your local PADI store, you can call them up and there's somebody there on staff that's already trained to teach you if you have a disability. But also, for other people who are divers who may have a family member with a disability or know somebody with a disability, I would highly encourage you to just encourage them to try it. Because, for me and for other people, once we have tried it, like, it just let the doors open to everything else in life. So it really, it just comes down to just trying something new. And really, that's what I think, I sort of help bring to the table, is just momentum and excitement and enthusiasm. So I really just kind of I want anybody to get involved.
Yeah, and be inspired by that enthusiasm that you have, and just kind of keep it going. So I definitely am, and I appreciate you sharing your thoughts on that. Now, in 2016, you were actually inducted into the Women Divers Hall of Fame in recognition of all the amazing work that you've done over the years, connecting people with physical and mental challenges with scuba diving, like we've just spoken about. So what does being part of the Women Divers Hall of Fame mean to you?
Oh man, it means everything. And my mom was the one who nominated me. And when I went to the induction ceremony, it was just, I mean, it was so empowering to see how many women were involved in diving, but in all different ways, right? Like mapping the ocean floor. I mean, just not only from just a general diving perspective, but a lot of women have been doing incredible, incredible things with diving. It's not, so it was just so fun and incredible. And I feel so honored. I say that all the time everywhere I go, like I'm in a Hall of Fame, and it's the Women Divers Hall of Fame. They get, people assume different Hall of Fames, but when you say Women Divers Hall of Fame, it brings back the focus to diving, and also kind of including more women into diving, into the sport. So it was such a huge honor.
Yeah, that's so amazing. I love that you tell people that you're part of the Hall of Fame. That's so great. So it's pretty obvious that you absolutely love diving. You love every single dive that you do, I imagine, even in a pool. But, with the name of this podcast being Dive Stories, I ask this to all of our guests. What is one of your most memorable dive stories of all time?
Oh man. There's so many. Definitely the first time I went diving in the ocean, because it did let me know that I can do this. Life is possible this way. But I will say that diving with the kids in Key Largo, actually young adults, but they have spina bifida or cerebral palsy. When we took them down to Key Largo, it was just so much fun to see the smiles on their faces. The cool thing about it is that was their certification trip. So, being underwater with them, and my dive team, the instructors that were there. So they had to, do their skills underwater, taking off their mask, taking their regulator out, putting it back in. So watching them just accomplish those skills was just phenomenal. Like because you can see it in their eyes that they're like, oh, so if I can do this, then I can do something else. Like just accomplishing the smaller tasks in life, especially those with disabilities, because it's the small things that really affect us and kind of determine our quality of life. That's what I saw in their faces, was just the sense of accomplishment.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing about diving that I sort of tell everybody, is that this is something that nobody can take away from you. Like, you've accomplished something that you never thought you could do, and now you have it in the bag. Like, you can just see the world view expand on their faces because of diving. So I think those, definitely the first dive I did in the ocean, and then diving with the kids in Key Largo.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. To wrap up though, Cody, I want to talk about just kind of seeking adventure in general. From your perspective, whether someone dreams of becoming a scuba diver or really doing any kind of adventurous activity, like you mentioned in the beginning, you come from a very adventurous, activity-based family. Why is it so important that we as humans, regardless of whatever challenges we may or may not face, why is it important that we continue to adapt to those challenges and to go out there and seek adventure?
Oh man, because life is crazy. because anything can happen to anybody at any time. You know, we always try to be as comfortable and as happy as possible, but life, you know, doesn't always go the way that we want it to. So it is important to seek out adventure because it keeps us alive and moving and going. You know, especially for people with disabilities, it's so easy to give up. And to seek out adventure, it just lets you know that, you know, life is so much bigger than any of us and all of us. And, you know, you do have to challenge yourself. I get bored really easily, especially like working out and staying healthy at the gym. Like, you got to do something adventurous to keep yourself going. So that's what I love about diving, is that it lets everything else be possible.
Yeah, amazing. Well, thank you, Cody, on behalf of our global community of PADI divers, for sharing your adaptive scuba diving journey with the world, for connecting so many other individuals with scuba diving through the Cody Unser First Step Foundation. And thank you for joining us on Dive Stories. It's really been so incredible chatting with you.
Yeah, you as well. And thank you all so much. And I hope to dive with all of you at some point or see you in an ocean. Yeah, let's all go diving.
Thanks for tuning in to Dive Stories. You've just heard Cody Unser, PADI ambassador and adaptive diving advocate. To learn more about Cody and support her work with the Cody Unser First Step Foundation, you can follow her on social media at Cody First Step and visit codyfirststep.org. Inspired to connect with the ocean further? Good news! We're offering Dive Stories podcast listeners an exclusive 20% off all PADI recreational e-learning courses. With PADI e-learning, you can start your next dive adventure right now from the comfort of your own home. E-learning allows you to complete the online portion first and then connect at any time with a PADI dive center or resort to complete your in-water training. Whether you're just starting or continuing your diving journey, PADI e-learning is an ideal way to jumpstart your next underwater adventure. So head to PADI.com/courses to select which course is right for you and use code PODCAST, that's PODCAST, to take advantage of this exclusive 20% off discount. This has been Dive Stories, brought to you by PADI. Seek adventure, save the ocean. If you love the ocean and enjoyed this podcast episode, please subscribe to Dive Stories in your podcast app and feel free to leave a review. Follow PADI on social media and head to PADI.com to join our community of torchbearers working together to seek adventure and save the ocean. I'm your host, Ocean Allison. Happy diving!